maybe
Fill the time.
While you're setting that up, the biggest problem with the latency isn't that the Raspberry Pi has, let's say, 4 frames of lag. It's that it has between 2 and 6. So there's no way you could ever just time your jumps or time your moves because it's constantly changing. And even though there's no way your hands could plan on 3 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds, it's just subconscious. Anytime you've seen a professional fighting game being played, that's, you'll know immediately what I'm talking about. So FPGA stuff, if programmed the way these are, there is 0 latency consistently.
and they work great every time. Now, what we've got here on screen is just some of the things you have to get for a Mister, because Mister is a collection of hardware, and it's a collection of open source projects that work with this hardware. So what I've got on screen right now is something called the DE10 Nano. This is the heart of the system, isn't it?
Correct.
And so this board is used for mostly industrial purposes. You probably have an FPGA in your car that does car things, but they can also be programmed to become retro game consoles too. And this part is the first component, but there's some other components too. So let's pull up my webcam here so I can show you some of the other stuff here. So we've got this Mister thing. That's the, what is that, the I/O board?
Yeah, that's the first revision, the current revision I/O board, yes.
And what do you do with the I/O board? That's like analog out and that sort of thing?
Right, so the DE10 Nano itself is actually a piece of hardware that Intel subsidizes. So if you were to just buy the FPGA chip on that device, it would be more expensive than the full thing that you get from Amazon. So that's a very powerful thing. And then the Mister I/O board is just simply tapping into what those chips on the DE10 Nano could already do. So the I/O board adds a fan, obviously. It adds 3 buttons, which are very handy because it reset console, bring up menu, reset the whole thing. And then of course you have the analog output, which could be component video, VGA, and I think you could even get adapters for composite in this video as well.
Pretty complete. And that's something that may be optional, the I/O board. You probably don't.
The I/O board is completely optional if you're only doing HDMI output. It is a neat thing to have though.
And then over here, this might be hard to see, but there's this little board I've got plugged into the DE10 Nano, and that's my RAM board. And this one is getting more complicated now because they're pushing the hardware further. So right now I've got 32 megabytes, which would have been a lot back in my day, but that's it. But now it's going up to what,
128 megabyte is the biggest one, and 64 is the one that should handle almost everything, but you need 128 just for Neo Geo games, and not all of them, just some of the larger ones.
And I would recommend, if you're interested in this, when you get home, go to the Mister GitHub page. It's so good, the documentation on this, both for people that want to program for this platform, but also just to get into it. I did a live stream thinking it was going to be one of my disastrous live streams where I looked like an idiot, and I was actually able to get it working on the first shot. It basically runs off an SD card like the Raspberry Pi does. The process of getting it working is very similar to that. And they've been making it so much better over time. Now there's a script that I run when I first boot it up, and it goes out and grabs every core and updates everything automatically. It's magic, so it's definitely worth checking out. There's a bunch of sites now starting to support the community. Mr. Add-ons is one of them, where you can get a lot of these things, cases and RAM boards and that sort of thing as well. So this is one of these projects that is just a fun winter thing to do. Like, just lock yourself in your house and get going with it, and once you start playing with it, you'll never want to go back. So this is the main menu. Now, what we're not going to cover too much today are the classic computers, but it can do, you want it to be a Commodore 64, I can do that for you. Boom, you've got a Commodore, hopefully, 64, there it is. And you can run all your Commodore stuff, the Commodore core and the Amiga core. A lot of these older computers are really well replicated here, and it's amazing how good it is, especially on the audio side. What we're going to do, though, is just go into the consoles, and I thought I would start off with my favorite here, ColecoVision. There you go. Every kid in my school had ColecoVision. You were a ColecoVision kid? You were Connecticut also.
No, I think I'm just like a year or two younger than you, so I started out. That wasn't a dig, by the way.
I feel young.
Yeah,
and being here with video game enthusiasts like myself, it's good. So we just hit a button and it became a ColecoVision. Pretty cool. We'll wait for a bit of time to load up.
And any retro enthusiast that's into Coleco, your heart probably just sank, because in order to get it to look this good through HDMI or even through analog is a lot of money and a lot of work. So just being able to press a button and have a perfect ColecoVision is pretty impressive.
It's amazing. I was thinking about trying to get my Coleco working again, and then I got this, and it was good. I would show you the game, but I don't have everything mapped properly, and we are short on you get the idea. The next thing I want to do is the NES. And one of the things that you can do when you have an FPGA is bring in a lot of the other things that you could do on a cartridge. So for example, and hopefully this audio will work properly, I have the Castlevania 3 game, which in Japan had a custom audio chip, if I'm not mistaken. So we can load that up real quick here, and just go into the game here, and you can hear the audio working. And let's follow that. Sound right?
Yeah.
This is pushing my luck because this is the floppy disk system, which I didn't test last night, so it can do that, I believe, right?
Yeah, so the thing that's pretty amazing about this is because it's a recreation of original hardware and original chips, there's a team of people now working on things like, do you want the Genesis core to sound like a Model 1 or a Model 2? You know, which version of the Famicom audio do you want to listen to? So it's a true recreation of the original and even different versions of the original.
And we can load up that Genesis core real quick and show you that, I believe. Let's see. I think I have to, I did the wrong way back. Sometimes your system will need a little reboot every once in a while, but generally it works pretty well here.
Yeah, that's the other reason why I like the I/O board, because anytime I have any issues, I just press the button. There you go.
Now, I believe they got virtual erasing working, and then it keeps defaulting to my,
Mine does that too. You have to reset it to US or it won't work.
right, so let's do a reset here. It may not work, though. I was having trouble getting it to work last night. It didn't work last night, but now it's working. Now, what's unique about this game is, what, this had a separate chip on it, right?
Right, so this is now an FPGA recreation of both all the chips on the Genesis as well as the custom chip in virtual racing. So it's doubling down.
And you can see all the options that we have here. There's, I believe that option to set the audio filter is in this menu. So yeah, Model 1 looks like it's set it to Model 2 filter. They've got a lot of great HDMI filters also as well, so you can smooth things out a little bit. And it's not like that emulation smoothing where it's like awful or not awful. This one has got very good reason adjustment to everything. So there's a lot of great stuff. Our projectors are not really getting good ideas to how that works, but this is the kind of stuff you can do with it. And again, everything is being very accurately represented here. Let's go take a look.
And it's funny too, with all the blue backgrounds, anybody that's tried to use unmodified Genesis consoles on digital screens, notice those jail bar streaks, but because all of it's recreated in FPGA, there isn't any physical interference between them. So you get the same performance, but with none of the interference or jail bars on there.
And what's really cool is the TurboGrafx core is also doing super graphics, which was a very short-lived project. Now, a funny story about this, when I was a kid, I should have stuck with this. When I was 13, I had a cable access show about video games. If you go on my channel, you can find an interview I did in a suit, interviewing a guy from a game store. And we were talking about all the new stuff coming out. And I should have stuck with it, but this store was in the town next over from me, and they had a super graphics. And I was going on footage and everything. It was pretty wild. So, it's just that simple. Let's get it set. Yeah, try more than 3 on the volume. Was it a little loud there?
Yeah, because it's interrupting.
Okay, we'll turn down the volume. All right, so the next thing we wanted to do is the Super Nintendo core, because there's some new developments here too, right? So we're gonna pull up Star Fox 2, which was a Super FX game,
Correct.
and they've done that now. That wasn't initially in there, but now it is, right?
All of the open source work from people that are working on the SDs and SNES has been ported over, or it's in the midst of being ported over. So yeah, this is all happening because a group of people are sharing their research with everybody else.
It looks good. And back in the day, this was really revolutionary stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you think for like a real accurate, because there are some really accurate emulators on the PC. What would you need hardware for?
So the creator of BSNES, which is also called Hagen for some reason sometimes, and it's He did a full analysis of it, and you would still need one of the fastest computers on the market now to get a perfect recreation in high def or in 4K. So it's, I mean, you would need an incredibly fast computer to get a flawless emulation of this on via software.
And with this, you're looking at what, like maybe about.
There you go.
For this, you're looking at maybe what, with the RAM board and a heat sink, probably what, about $200?
I'd say budget for about $200 for that, but yeah, absolutely.
And so for $200, you can do what it would take normally a much more expensive PC to replicate perfectly. And it's funny is that if you're really into the Raspberry Pi, as I am, because I think there's a lot of great things you can do with it, if you were to plug this in and play a game and then go back to the Pi, I think you'll notice the difference. And it's funny too because there was a time I was doing a review of a smartphone and I was noticing that the Bluetooth controller lag was pretty bad. And it took me down this rabbit hole of doing more and more of this input lag stuff. And I don't do it as well as Bob does here, but it was remarkable when you really start looking at the actual figures here, the differences, because your TV introduces a lot of lag too, right?
Absolutely. Any flat screen TV will introduce latency. It's just a matter of how much and